the job of a trader. You have given the best answer to what the job of a trader is that I have ever heard. So, can you tell us what the job of a trader is?
Sure. So I think if you really think about our job, what we're doing is we're trying to identify at any given moment of time, what do we expect or estimate that the expected value is? And then based on that information, how are we betting? Right? Because we'll see some trade where you think it's amazing and you might bet heavily, then other people on the firm didn't take the trade at all, and presumably they've seen many of the same ones. And the question is, okay, why not? They had a different view of expected value. And so if you think about it, every single thing we do is, did I accurately estimate the expected value based on experience and all the variables and everything? Then did I bet appropriately? And I think so often what really, really separated me was in times where people throughout the firm all really liked the same trade. If I recognized the trade as being really, really good, I would just bet so much more exponentially.
So, the job of a trader is essentially to identify expected value and bet accordingly,
Yeah,
right? So that's the thing. So, I think that expected value is simply the most foundational concept in trading.
100%.
And believe it or not, even amongst some traders, I think it's one of the most widely misunderstood things.
The amount of fallacies out there and people that haven't deeply thought about expected value and like sure you can have some level of success without thinking about it, but it truly impairs so many people's trading because they haven't actually done the work. And it bleeds into their trading and their biases.
I am going to go so far as to say that you could be successful, you could have a period of, a great run without really fundamentally understanding this. But unless you fundamentally understand expected value, and this is not rocket science at all, I really don't think you can have a very long term successful career in trading or anything else that requires probabilistic thinking. Can you explain to us what expected value is?
So expected value really just comes down to over the long run, what is the expectancy, or in other words, what is the result of doing this trade over an infinite number of times? In other words, right, if I flip a coin, head or tails, if I win $1 for heads, lose $1 for tails, 50-50 odds, in the long run, I'm going to make $0. And our goal as traders is to find where do we have not necessarily a greater than 50-50 chance, but where do we have a positive expectancy based on both the chance of success and the risk reward? And so many people alone make the fallacy that they think, oh, I need a 60-70% win rate. Or I need it's so I don't even know where FinTwit comes up with some of this crap, but so many people are like, "Oh, I need a 3-to-1 reward to risk." Uh, no, you don't. And so many people will be like, "Oh man, like, oh, you could the risk was 10x your reward." So what if you win 99.5% of the time, right? If your risk is 10x the reward, you just need to size it appropriately. And so many people don't understand that stuff. And if that stuff sounds like gibberish, you need to slow this video down and really think about it because that fundamental understanding, like you said, is everything to our job.
So if that sounds like gibberish to you, then I think you should take the next slide we're going to put up here and pause and take a minute to watch it a few times because it might look like some horrible math formula, but it is really not complicated. And I think so when I started working with you, one of the things that I did amongst a lot of things was I took every single trade that I made for a long period. I don't know how long it was, but it was a long period of time. And it didn't matter if I was risking a dollar. It wasn't the size. It was what was the expected value of that trade? And obviously that's it's an estimate on my part, but I wanted to get into the habit of thinking of every single
Yep.
trade in terms of what the expected value was, not was I right, was I wrong, but what was the expected
Yeah.
value. And
That's
so I
such a great exercise.
and so I did that for every single trade for, I don't know, maybe 6 months until it was just ingrained in my head to think that way. And this is the formula that I used. So just a quick explanation. If this, if math isn't your thing and this looks sort of horrible to you, let me just run through it. This is really not that complicated. It is the probability of me being right. In this example, it's 90%, and the reward is $5, and the risk is a dollar. Then it is 90% times 5 minus 1 minus zero point 0.9. So there's a 10% chance I'm going to be wrong times 1. And all that's going to be times however many shares I think I can trade under those terms without moving the market such that those odds change. So in this case, when you do all that math, the expected value of this trade comes to $44,000. This was the way that I forced myself to think about trading. It was the foundational concept that really got me to the next level in my trading. And I think that this is something that should be taught to everybody on day one.
What's so interesting is I think so many people, and it's just human nature, I think for the most part, so many people will overweight the really unlikely, low probability worst case scenarios. And for a lot of people, it's just a common human bias. And we saw that during the Silicon Valley banking crisis, where when those stocks were halting, I've had so many traders debate with me halt risk and stuff. And it's like, okay, like stocks can halt, but again, what's the probability that you're going to get caught in it during certain percents? And there was the famous WAL trade where the stock went from like 15 to like 20 or something. And people are worried about, oh, what if the stock gets halted? But it's like, dude, that thing ended up going like 4x, you know? And even even with stuff like GME and AMC moving around, oh, what happens if X tweet or Y tweet happens? Like, okay, it's totally valid to prepare and you want a game plan and you want to think about your risk and everything else. Like, all those are smart things to do. But if you're going to think about those outlier risks, you still need to ascribe a probability. And if that probability is like, oh man, there's like a 1% chance the stock gets halted or a 3% chance, or like, okay, there's like a 0.1% chance Roaring Kitty uh, tweets out JK. Just kidding. Like, this is all bullshit. Like, the odds of that, like, it's totally fine to think about that, but if the odds are like 0.1% that happens while you're in the trade, you need to just essentially near discount that whole thing. And the other thing too is people will take these worst case scenarios and then they just totally forget about the fact they're able to get out of the trade. Like, even if Roaring Kitty was like, oh, tee this was all bullshit, that stock is not just going to magically go to $5 or something, right? Even with the halt, it's still not going to just, there's still going to be some form of price discovery. And I see it all the time where you really need to force traders to say like, okay, I understand that you're afraid of that loss, but ascribe a probability.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is just we live in a probabilistic world. Anytime you hear one of these people, on, TV or on the internet or whatever, and they're talking about like this stock is going to go to X, Y, and Z, and I know that. I mean, they don't know that. The truth of the matter is there's too many variables in the real world to be able to say with 100% clarity very many things. So
Yeah.
it's all a probability. The question is, what is the probability? What's your risk? What's your reward? And you do the math to figure out on average what I'm going to make or lose in this trade. If you look at that trade that I had just thrown up there on the screen before, 10 times out of 100 I'm going to lose on that trade. And those 10 times it was still a good trade.
Yep.
I just caught the wrong 10 times.
You wanna know what makes me laugh too, is all this stuff is so pervasive in the real world too, where even if I'll pick on my mom, for example. Anytime I'm out and about in the city, she's like, "Oh, like, be safe." Or even I posted once on Twitter that I was taking the subway in New York, and people are like, "Oh my god, you're crazy." And look, the chance of some issue isn't 0, but you still need to weight it by, okay, it's very, very, very low for the what, tens of thousands of people riding the subway every day, and then you still need to weigh it against the benefit. And I mean, you're a longtime New Yorker, right? If you're trying to get somewhere at 5 p.m. uptown to downtown in New York City, there's generally one option because car is going to take you an hour. And so many times people think, oh man, this worst case scenario. But okay, again, what's the probability?
Sure. So when I started thinking in expected value, by the way, and this came a lot when we started working together, I realized some incredibly profound things about my trading. One of the things that I learned was that I wasn't varying my size enough based on expected
Yep.
value. And instead, I was varying my size, meaning getting more size when I was most confident in a trade working. But that is not necessarily the time to do it. It's not when, you could be most confident because I could be most confident on something, but the reward could be very small and the risk could be enormous. So that might not be the right time to size. It's really when the expected value is greatest. The
Yep.
other thing that I realized is I was complacent in some of, I don't know, the most obvious trades just because they were
Yep.
obvious. I had this
Yep.
tendency, and I think a lot of people, even at Trillium, do this, is that there's this tendency to wanna get big and really wanna crush, like, the sexy
The crazy
trades,
stuff,
like, the
yes,
volatile,
100%.
like and, you know what? I'm not look, there's a lot of money to be made in those trades. I mean, volatility is where opportunity is, but a lot of the time, you can pull so much expected value out of some of these, like, for lack of a better word, like, layup trades, like, that are not sexy, that are not talked about on
And that's
CNBC.
so much what I do with my preaching about those easy money trades. I think for almost any beginner to intermediate, really almost any trader, honestly, like certainly intermediate or advanced, the lowest hanging P&L is just sizing up your easy money trades. And it's so often not the super crazy risky ones that are flying all over the place. A lot of times it's like,
Which, by the way, everybody is looking at.
yeah, yeah, and sometimes it can just be a really, really simple, easy trade for you where you might be able to risk 1 or 2 pennies, and with 80% chance it goes 10. And most people will get 5,000 shares, but they could have just as easily, without slippage, gotten 50,000. And if you start to take those layups and bet so much more on them, that's what really started to elevate my game. And what I've seen it with so many traders I work with is the biggest progress leaps come from when they're able to start sizing those easy money trades, then that gives them the cushion to then parlay it on the big opportunities. And that's when that curve just goes right to the moon.
And this is, I think, probably one of the more profound things that I learned, which was that it's not necessarily the case, or it shouldn't even be your goal as a trader to have more right ideas or be, have a higher hit rate. Instead, your goal should be to capture more EV. That's the way elite traders think. That's the way to really improve your performance. Said another way, it's possible to lose money but make the right decision, and that be a good trade. It's no different than if you ever watched the World Series of Poker. Those guys all they don't get better cards, but at the World Series of Poker at the final table on any given year, it's always 3 or 4 people that are the same people year in and year out.
Yep.
They don't get better cards than anybody else. What's different about them is that when they know that they have the best hand, when they have the nuts or when they have the high expected value, they get the most money in that pot as they possibly can. That's the difference between those guys, and that's what separates, legendary traders like you from the pack, in my opinion.